if you receive for yourself satisfaction from helping people, there's no greater satisfaction than helping people get through, I would say, this what's known as the second hardest part of life after death is divorce.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Bar podcast. I'm your host, Denise Tova, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with RoseAnn Branda, who's the executive partner and director of the Family and Matrimonial Law Department at Abrams Fensterman. RoseAnn's journey into law is really interesting because she comes from a family without any lawyers in it, and she sort of found her own path into this demanding field, and is very dynamic, great energy, and I cannot wait to dive into her story. So, RoseAnn, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Denisa. Pleasure to be here.
It really is a pleasure to be here. I really enjoy meeting, I call it the self-made women, and I understand you shared just a little bit about your story with me. So growing up in a traditional Italian family must have been quite the experience. How did that shape your journey into becoming a divorce lawyer?
Well, such an interesting question. As I had indicated, my dad was a dentist and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And I think what I did was I took the best qualities from both of them and put them together in terms of my work as a divorce attorney. My dad had a very strong work ethic, and it's clear to me now at 60, almost 64 years old, that I developed his work ethic at some point. Probably after I became an attorney, it sort of grew and grew and grew. And my mother was an incredibly loving, compassionate person. And I think, uh, in addition, family meant everything to her. So, the people who come to us are experiencing problems within their own families. And I think the compassion and love that she showed me helps me to be compassionate with the cases that are before me. So I think there was a combination of their qualities that somehow inspired me and helped me be the lawyer I am today.
Sounds like you had a really great foundation growing up. Was there talk about you becoming an attorney? I'm just trying to
Never,
connect the dots.
never. I can connect them for you. What was always primary in terms of the focus of my family was education. My father had been the first professional in his family, and both my parents wanted us to have as much education as we wanted.
Mm.
So we sort of were expected after college to do some sort of higher education. And initially, my parents had geared me towards teaching, and I did try that. While I was in college, I did some student teaching, and I found it too limiting for me. I didn't want to be at the same place every day at the same time. I just wanted to have more exposure to the world, I guess. And so I decided to go to law school because it was trending at the time. But what happened was in my last year of college, my sister had a friend who had another friend who was an entertainment attorney. So I interned for that entertainment attorney in Manhattan, all the bright lights. And this
Mm.
attorney had one client, and his client was Mary Tyler Moore. And every
Wow.
morning, Mary Tyler Moore would walk into the office about 11, and the attorney and her would speak in their office for about an hour. Then they would go out for lunch. Then they would play tennis. Then he would come back to the office and call it a day. And that was my exposure to
Uh,
the law. And that is nothing like what my day turned out to be. But there was something about it was glamorous back then.
yeah.
I can't say it's so glamorous now, but the law firm I was in, where you had the luxury of having one client, was a very glamorous situation. But as I'm sure you know, that's not what the matrimonial lawyers of today's day at the office looks like.
First of all, going back, you said 64, you look amazing. Um,
Oh,
and I love just sort of your authenticity and just sort of casually describing, look, it was trending. It was something interesting to see and intriguing, and that's, drew you in. And you're right, the reality today, it's very different. There's so many layers in becoming or in being an attorney, effective attorney, and having to understand the different disciplines with the property division and the parenting, and in addition to that, dealing with a load of emotions. And I'm curious, I think there's a balance, being a good listener, being super important in your line of work. How do you manage to let people have sort of the ability to vent, have their say, but ultimately, guide them to a practical advice? Because if you wrap in emotions, it's tough to see through that.
another excellent question. I focus from the time of a consultation with a client on the big picture. I'm sort of known for that. And what I mean by that is it's obvious that divorce brings up a lot of emotion in our clients. And they do want to speak to you about many issues that may not be relevant. And there's a time where um, you need to listen, and then there's a
Yes.
time where you need to focus the client on conversations that are going to lead to a result um, that is in line with the big picture. So I am known to be strong with my clients. And what I have found through the years is, yes, they want to be heard, but they also want to come out at the end with a fair and just result. And if you measure both of those against one another, I would imagine that any client would tell you or me that they would prefer leaving with a fair and just result than spending time in my office, which was much better utilized in either a therapist or another professional's office, venting and correctly mourning the loss of their relationships.
Mm, that makes sense. Ultimately, there needs to be some finality, um, and uh, um, and there's a difference between equity and fairness, and trying to go after fairness. Everybody has they have their own definition of fairness, and going after fairness, you can never quite get there. However, getting there in optimally and as efficiently with the least adversarial um, process. I mean, that's there's just there, this is it's just such a difficult process. You've been
Well,
doing this
that
for
leads
such a
me. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was just going to say that the when you asked me about how do you listen to the clients, and
yeah.
if we tie that into how do we get a fair result, and what's fair to one may not be fair to the other, when you really listen to what's important to the client, it very much assists in negotiations, because if it's more important for one client to reach a result that would be fair to them, the only way to know that is for the clients to really effectively listen to what is most important to them. Is a custody result more important than a financial result? I mean, there should be no reason why both results shouldn't end up both fair and equitable. But um, sometimes what's more important to one is not important to another. So you need to listen.
That is a good point. And sometimes they're not that far apart. And
True.
it's gets interesting if there is a room, if there's a room for the other to listen and acknowledge and say, well, if I was to ask you, what do you think is important to in process of determining what's important to you, what do you think is important to your soon to be ex-spouse? It's almost like there may be a little movement. Well, okay, the priority for me is X, Y, and Z, whereas for her it may be this. And if they can hear each other, because sometimes, when they're completely apart, negotiations happen behind closed doors and they're completely separated. There's just a lot that could be sort of salvaged, again, depending on the circumstances. But that's I love your practical approach, listening
You're
really
you're
and
100%
listening.
correct, by the way.
Yeah.
100% correct.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I can sense it. You breathe it. You are in it. You're so experienced. Um, if you couldn't practice law, what would you do?
Well, I have a tremendous love of the arts, but particularly the theater. And of course, I wouldn't want to be within a production, but I would love to be behind the scenes of a production. At some point in the future, I'd love to get involved with the theater in some way, because
Hmm.
that has been it's been a hobby of mine from when I was very young. I love musicals, I love dramas, I love the theater, and I love the
So if
arts.
you were to be involved in a play, in a musical, what role would you like to play?
Producer, a producer probably.
What type of play would you like to produce, you think? Who would be like a central role?
Well, I would love to be involved in a musical that told a life story, an interesting life story, because there are many interesting life stories, public figures, perhaps, or a non public figure, but just a story of people's lives. I think as you get older, your perspective on so many things change.
Mm.
We, you and I had a conversation prior to this podcast starting concerning a prior interview that you had done. I don't need to name the person, but it was very interesting conversation because it brought to mind the fact that as we get older, you recognize that you can be at a high and then tomorrow you can be at a low, and you never know, or you can never really predict when that happens. So maybe a story that has something like that attached to it.
That would be interesting. When you think you are invincible, top of your career and doing really, really well, and then something happens, a defining moment, um, and then you have the choice. It can either make you, break you. You can recover. It's really, what is it? It's the steps that you take after, as we dealing with losses or challenges and all sorts of life situations that throw us curveballs. It's I think it's the decisions that you make afterwards. Yeah.
And your reactions is really a better indicator of your character after situations occur. How do you pick yourself up? Do you give up?
Yeah. Wow. Who introduced you to theater? How did you cultivate this passion?
I would assume originally my parents. I remember loving Dreamgirls, and I was probably very young when that came out. But I was involved in the theater in the schools that I went to, both in high school. I actually remember being in in my grammar school. We did a production of A Midsummer's Night Dream, and I played Puck. I remember that. But then I also continued on in high school. I became the president of the drama club, and then also in college, I was involved as well. So I always had an interest. So it was probably through schooling and my family, and then it just continued.
Did it help you, the theater performance, even in the formative years with, with your court appearances?
I think when I was younger, I suffered, like most of the young attorneys today, with a fear of public speaking. But then as my career grew and I did it more and more, which is what I always try to explain to the attorneys that work with me, um, after a while, it becomes second nature. And when you're really invested in the argument that you're making, the rest of
Mm.
the world sort of disappears, and then you end up speaking directly to the judge, and it doesn't really feel like public speaking anymore. So I guess it helped train a little bit, but I think the more you do oral arguments, the more comfortable you become with speaking in front of other people. I may naturally just be a dramatic person. I'm not sure it has to do with theater. I just maybe just naturally am.
Hmm. How would your very, very best friend or your closest friend, how would she describe you?
Oh, that's and such an interesting question. My best friend, who I have been best friends with since I am 9 years old, we met at Poly Prep Day Camp, and we're still best friends today. So
Oh,
I told you my age, so you can count the years.
wow.
Um, she would describe me as fiercely loyal. She would describe me as fun. She would describe me as hardworking, committed to causes, family oriented. Um, I think I think those would be the top descriptions.
Hmm. I can see that. Wow. What um what does your weekend look like? If you're not going to theater, if you're not going to see a play, how do you, and I'm careful with the word balance because again, I'm finding that balance, the work-life balance. I think it's such a cliche and we've sort of we've transitioned into a very different world. Like for me, work-life balance is I translate it to mean growth. So to me, it's 7 days a week. I like to use my brain, and whether it's reading about something or just growing. Period. What is that for you? If you were to sort of a step outside of the cases, and you're not going to theater, what do you enjoy doing?
Well, I'd say around 30 years old, I recognized the importance of physical outlet to manage and to balance. So I very much like working out in all different forms. Over the years, it has changed. I used to love anything that had high intensity involved,
Mm,
spinning, things that would really push you, raise your endorphins, and calm the nervous system when you were finished. But as you get older, or as I got older, I recognized that I started to feel more grounded with yoga and with Pilates and also weightlifting. So I think what I love to do on the weekends is to focus on movement of some sort every day. It doesn't have to be intense, but I do like to do that and I do find it grounding. I also love to travel.
Mm,
I love to explore places, restaurants, things that I've never experienced before. I always love to try new things. I spend the weekends with family and friends. My niece just had a baby and literally on July 1st, and she lives down
congratulations.
in thank you, in St. Petersburg. I'll be flying back and forth there. I love to garden and I have a very full life. So I think I was blessed with the ability to compartmentalize the intensity of my job with um, being able to enjoy a full life outside of the office.
Hmm. It sounds like you know how to sort of what fills you up and finding joy in so many things and just in life. It is really great to hear. What would be, I know we talked about as advice for new incoming attorneys, practicing public speaking. What else would you tell an incoming attorney? Maybe advice that you didn't, no one told you, you had to figure it out on your own.
Well, I speak to young attorneys a lot, and I think the best advice I would tell them is not to worry about being the smartest person in the room
Mm,
and to focus on being the hardest worker in the room because my experience is that the hardest worker is always going to trump the smartest person. And there's also so that's a big picture concept, but you know, you have to put in the work to get the result. And there's no easy way of doing what we do. And if you're looking for an easier way, not sure matrimonial law would is the place for you. Um, I also would tell them that if you receive for yourself satisfaction from helping people, there's no greater satisfaction than helping people get through, I would say this what's known as the second hardest part of life after death is divorce.
mm,
And there is so many of my clients I keep in touch with from years back. I've represented generations of people now, and it's very satisfying to know that you've made a difference in even one person's life. That's so much for the better.
That is, it is an incredible, incredible responsibility. And I think in some aspects, because a divorce attorney, like any other, you either become sort of a service provider, just my observation, like any other profession or entrepreneur. And not only the landscape, how we connect is changing, also technology is changing by the second. And I think so staying ahead of innovation, in addition to what is needed and up to speed with a continuing education. And I think also working on yourself as a human being, because we all bring in stuff into life based on our upbringing and preferences. Well, as you said, you are able to compartmentalize, excuse me, but that to me comes with life experience, with age. You don't get there in your 20s and sometimes not even, in your 30s. If you are in a hot mess, it's hard to sit there with someone who's dealing with having to make life decisions. And so you're right, it is constant growth and a hard work, and you can evolve as a human. It's an opportunity to also grow as a human being in this profession if you truly
Well,
embrace it.
another major benefit, which I think drew me to the profession, is it's not boring.
Right.
we do not, we do not, and with no disrespect to attorneys who deal in other areas, but we are not dealing with a car accident, a slip and fall. Every case that comes before us gives us an opportunity to learn about a different career. Once when you divorce someone, you're divorcing two people who may have two different professions, and you multiply that over the years that you practice, and you're exposed to and are learning about so many different things. You're learning about the financial market. You're learning about real estate. You're learning about various businesses. You're learning about public companies. You're learning about small businesses. The list goes on and on and on. You work with professionals that are either dealing in mental health or dealing with money, and you're constantly learning. And any case that ultimately goes to trial is like a big puzzle that you have to fit the pieces together on. So it's challenging, but it's exciting as well. If you like to learn, it's very
Yes.
exciting.
Yes. And it sounds like you do.
I do.
Yeah, I can tell. It's you still have the passion for the profession, and you really do take it to heart. And you must be a terrific mentor. And I tell incoming attorneys that who I meet at, whether it's through the podcast or various networking events, to take advantage of people like yourself and connect with them, get mentored, ask a lot of questions, and like you said, you don't have to have answers. Just saying, I need help. I do not know. Um, any parting thoughts before we wrap up? It's been really a true pleasure.
I feel the same. Um, no, I have no parting thoughts except I'm lucky to have chosen a field that I still find satisfaction from all these years later. And I'm grateful, very, very grateful for all the opportunities that the career has given me in life.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey. Um, there's just you have such a diverse background, but it continues interests and thank you for a great message for incoming attorneys. And your story is truly it's interesting, it's inspiring, it's fun. So thank you very much. It was a
Thank
true
you,
pleasure.
Denisa. Thank you for having me very much.
And to our viewers and listeners, to find out more about RoseAnn Branda and how to get in touch with her, make sure you check out her bio link below. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Beyond the Bar Podcast. And of course, follow us on all our social media channels. And until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.